welcome. We started with a little bit about the new year, and I appreciate that everybody has a busy year ahead, and I want to appreciate all of you for taking time to join us for this January 10th Community Advisory Committee meeting. I'm going to go ahead and take us through a few things just because we are really excited for your time here. We're excited to get a lot of input, and I want to mention a few things for an interactive meeting. First of all, we are recording this call, and we want to do that because we want to make it available to the community. Folks like you, as you'll hear in a minute, you guys have already been very involved in the groundwater sustainability plan. But we want to have this be available to folks who are just getting up to speed, and we have a lot to do today in that regard. So first of all, just want to mention we're going to look to an interactive call. We've set this up, unlike the virtual town hall that many of you attended, that it's an open meeting. So please keep yourself on mute when you're not participating with questions. You can also chat with questions that come up, and in fact, I'm already seeing in the chat a few people have talked about what they're looking forward to this year. Thanks, John. You're looking forward to seeing what we learned from this remarkable wet season. We'll be talking about all these things, so I do encourage folks to use the chat. So yeah, that's how you can do it with that little button. And we also encourage you to stay on video, and in a little bit we'll be turning off the presentation so you can see each other, but wanted to first start with just a few logistical things. The next thing is we invite you to share your name and your affiliation. You can click on the icon in the upper right corner and rename yourself. I invite you to, we have a mix of folks on this call. Of course, this call is dedicated time for the Citizen Community Advisory Committee. And so we encourage you, if you're on the Community Advisory Committee, please put CAC after your name. You can see Chris Lee from the Solano GSA, and maybe a couple other GSA members will put in GSA. There's a few of us from the project team working on hydrology and outreach and modeling, and so we have project team. And if you don't fall into any of those groups, we invite you to put an O next to your name. We're really excited to see a bunch of you observers. There's 24 of us on this call, and I know there are a lot of public observers who are interested in this topic. One note for those of you observing the call, we want to get to a lot of public comment, and we will prioritize when we have the discussion. I'll call on CAC members first, since this call is really with them in mind. But I do encourage you to type anything into the chat, and we'll make sure we get time for all of your questions at the end, even if we don't get to them ongoing. So that's a really important thing. Just a couple more things from me. I wanted to just again remind folks of our goals for this conversation. We're at a big moment. The Groundwater Sustainability Plan is being finalized and submitted to the Department of Water Resources as we speak. We'll talk a little bit. I know a number of you were at the virtual town hall, and we'll talk about what we learned and what we've learned over the many years of working on this. We also, one of the main goals for this call is to really get your input on outreach and engagement. We're going to share a little bit about what we've learned through comments, but we really want your idea as we're transitioning into this implementation of the groundwater sustainability plan. We really want your ideas for maintaining and growing outreach. So we have a good part of this call dedicated to that. And then we also want to take some time to just appreciate the Community Advisory Committee members who have been involved and who have helped this plan get to where it is. And so that is another one of our goals for today. Here's the agenda. We have a number of topics to talk about. I previewed some of them, but I want to just, share with you. We're going to start a little bit where we are, reflect on the town hall and the plan that has been finalized. Then we'll look forward to the groundwater sustainability plan implementation and have an interactive discussion there. As mentioned, we really want your input on outreach and engagement. And then we also want to come back to hearing how you would like to stay involved. And we'll do that before we adjourn. So one last note, just to help us take advantage of our time together, we're going to invite you to really focus on groundwater sustainability. I know there are so many other pressing topics right now, but that's what this call is focused on. Please stay present and listen generously. Please keep your cameras on when we get to the discussion portions, and keep yourself on mute as I previewed earlier. And you know, leave time and space for others and listen to their questions and ask your own. So that is just a little bit of a preview. And now I'm going to turn us to the main topic of our discussion, which really is this groundwater sustainability plan. So you guys have been intimately involved in crafting the plan that we're submitting to DWR right now, and that we previewed at a number of virtual town halls and in this meeting. This slide will not be new to you, but these are all topics that I know are important. And in a minute, we're going to have Vicki telling us a little bit more about the groundwater sustainability plan. But before I do that, I want to just take a moment to thank the 6 of you who participated in the virtual town hall. That was on November 9th. That was our last of a number of virtual town halls. As you can see from this slide, that was held in English and in Spanish. We had 114 people registered, 81 people participate. Lupe is right now going to put in the chat the link to the video the recording of that. So those of you who didn't participate can see that. And then also, I wanted to just take a minute to acknowledge again those 6 of you who participated, and Elizabeth Fry in particular, and wanted to invite any of you to mention any observations you had from that. So that in that, and as you can see on this agenda, we talked about the plan development. We had an interactive public input session, a very interactive public input session, a lot of great questions. And then, again, the recording is there for those who missed it. But before, I'm going to stop sharing just for a minute. And before I move on, does anybody want to share any observations from that meeting? Or any questions that you had coming out of it that you are interested in for today? And while you think of any of those, want to just thank all of you who are on the Community Advisory Committee meeting. You guys have put CAC. You can all use your gallery function to see who's on the call. I'm noticing a few GSA members who were also at that meeting who have really contributed to this plan. But before I go on to the question, to today's discussion, anybody want to mention anything about the virtual town hall or anything you learned as we were bringing the groundwater sustainability plan final draft forward? All right, well, those questions, this is not your only opportunity to ask those questions. Why don't I'll keep presenting, but think about that. That might be something, if it comes to you, please put it into the chat. And again, thanks to the 80+ people who attended that meeting. All right, I'm gonna transition now to a little bit more about the meetings that we've had and where the Community Advisory Committee has really been helpful. So on this slide, you see the past 6 meetings and what has been discussed there. It's pretty impressive. I watched a lot of those on YouTube, and it was impressive to me to think of all the knowledge and the good questions that this group has had. And I want to turn it to Amy Ryan, who facilitated a number of these meetings, and just want to thank you, Amy, for bringing those meetings forward and facilitating those questions, and invite you to just introduce yourself and say anything you'd like.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Jen, and hi to the CAC members. Some folks I don't know, but who are on the call, but others I do. And I just want to come and say thank you it's really fun. I'm glad you put this list together, Jen, just to see how far we've come together. And I'm sorry that I wasn't able to be a part of this final push, but I know you've been in good hands with Jen and the rest from the GSP development team. So I'm really grateful. The input that you guys have given has made a really invaluable sort of imprint on the GSP, and I'm grateful for the time and energy and insight that you guys have done. I know it's been a big help to the GSP project team, and I've learned a bunch from you all, and just it speaks volumes of what you're willing to offer to your community and the future of sustainability, groundwater sustainability in your community. So thank you again. Jen, I'm going to pass it back over to you, but just as we reflect on how far we've come, we've got the implementation ahead of us, and I know that there's work there to be done, but it's a significant moment to pause and celebrate. So thanks again, and over to you, Jen.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Amy. And thanks to all of, you're seeing a bunch of the presenters from these meetings, Nick and Vicky, but there were, other experts that were brought in, and really it's a wealth. And those archives are on the archive site at solanogsp.com. So if you're new to this call and want to review any of those, you can. But I'm going to give a quick review to some of the areas that were covered in those meetings and were covered in public input on the groundwater sustainability plan. This slide lists some things that we heard during your meetings and in additional conversations with the community. So I'm showing them on the slides. I won't read them all, but want to just highlight again, thank you. A few of you on this call are in the Northwest area, and you've helped to foster conversations with your neighbors, and those are going on into the implementation phase. So, we might talk about those today, but if we don't, I want people to know that that kind of input has been really useful and will go forward in projects and management actions. We also heard a lot about drinking water quality, and I want to thank the Local Government Commission and the Freshwater Trust for work with vulnerable communities and on other outreach. And Lupe is going to lead a conversation later, and we want your input in that conversation to help make sure that we can keep things like water quality and sustainability, groundwater sustainability that are forefront of your mind. And we've heard that, but we want to keep those in the forefront. So we'll have a conversation about that a little bit later today. We also heard loud and clear the deep importance of agriculture, and that there's a lot of specific interests and the need to balance agriculture and development, and think about how we can support agricultural sustainability and groundwater sustainability. So these are themes we've heard. I want to invite Genevieve, Chris, anybody, Justin Cole, anybody who might want to add to this about some of the themes and how this group has helped to improve the plan and the discussion around that.
Sure. Well, hi, everybody. It is great to be here, and great to be both at the edges of some really needed water and heading into I'm hopeful, a green spring for everyone. So when I heard some of the things that we really heard and took away was this desire to protect agriculture, and also to balance it with all of the other needs that are in Solano Sub-Basin. So particularly, there was a conversation about development and protecting the drinking water of rural residential owners, and understanding that those pieces could all be achieved together and also needed to be viewed as a whole. So, when I was looking at the notes from the CAC, it really struck me how in depth the questions were, how you all took your role as in terms of asking and understanding the science that was going into the GSP, and then really reflecting the work of the perspectives of the communities that you're a part of. We really saw that show up in these meetings. And so I really want to thank you for that. We heard that. It was helpful for us as we were working on the GSP. We worked hard to reflect that. And, you know, in this process, my hope is that it's both supported your own leadership as part of your communities. We'll need that. I mean, this is, you know, the beginning of the implementation over time. And just to know that it really did make a difference to how the GSP was authored.
Yeah, thanks, Genevieve. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but invite, before we turn to Vicky's presentation, I want to invite anybody on the Community Advisory Committee to add anything there in terms of the themes you just saw or anything at this juncture. And in a minute, we'll turn to more about the groundwater sustainability plan. All right, well, Vicky,
Hi,
why don't we
this is
turn to, oh, go ahead. I see. Yeah.
Yeah, this is John Hopkins. I'm joining by phone as I just got Zoom was the invalid. So I can't see the slides, but I just wanted to mention when I looked at the draft plan a couple of months ago, whenever it was, I was very, very concerned that your climate considerations were based on past observations, whereas we know that future climate, including rainfall, is going to be different. So the focus on past records as opposed to models for future rainfall really bothered me.
Thanks, John. Thanks for calling in and also for sharing that comment. And Vicky is going to talk a little bit about some of the items. And if we don't come to that during her presentation, maybe we can come back to it, or Vicky, if you want to address that specifically now before your presentation, go for it.
No, that's okay. I just wanted to make sure that my point, everyone heard my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. Great. And also for those of you who have just joined, we are using the chat as well, and appreciate, it looks like there's already a bit of a dialogue about John's comment here. And John, I know on the phone you might not be able to see that, but we can make sure and share some of that dialogue with you. The main note I think on that is you know, the project team and GSAs will be doing annual and larger 5-year updates to look at concerns and to use real data in that. So that is something, thanks for registering your point, and also something that we can continue that dialogue about. So yeah, any other comments at this juncture? Well, Vicki, maybe I'll invite you to share your screen, and we can spend a little bit of time looking at the groundwater sustainability plan itself.
Okay, thank you, Jen, and thank you everybody for your attendance this afternoon. This brief presentation that I'm about to present is kind of a whirlwind of highlights of the GSP development process and next steps. As those of you who have attended all the meetings that Jen showed on her slide a moment ago, and there's a lot of material, so this is truly a brief flyover. So the Solano Collaborative and the CAC and all of the teams and committees worked together to develop one sustainability plan for the entire Sub-Basin. This included 10 groundwater sustainability agencies. 5 of those formed the Solano Collaborative. And as Jen showed, there were a number of different sections in the GSP during the past couple of years. There are individual draft GSP sections that we've prepared and that have been reviewed by the Collaborative and the CAC, other GSAs, and then posted for public review. The final GSP contains several main components, which are shown here, a number of chapters relating to describing basin conditions and several related to defining basin sustainability. And there's also a chapter related to the development of projects and management actions that we received input on from the collaborative and the CAC. And then also plan implementation in chapter 9. Altogether, there's nearly 6,000 pages, and there are 21 appendices besides the main, the core GSP document. There's also a relatively short executive summary that's both in English and Spanish, for those of you who don't care to read all 6,000 pages. So during the past couple of years, we've described to the CAC the analyses that have been conducted to assess the volumes of water that are flowing into and away from the subbasin during historical and current periods, and also 50 years into the future. And these water budget components for each year of the historical period, that's what's shown on this slide. We had other presentations that showed some of the 50 years into the future. But here on this slide, we're showing the inflows to the basin that are shown as the positive values on this graph. And then we're also showing the outflows as negative values. But the overall main theme here is year to year, we see comparability of the inflows and the outflows with some variations during wetter years and drier years. The dashed line on this slide shows the cumulative change in groundwater storage, which when we look at the end of the historical period, there's a positive change in storage. In other words, the inflows are greater than the outflows, which is a good thing. And there's a positive change and increase in the groundwater and storage. And this is all because of the wise decisions historically and approaches to water resources management in the sub-basin many decades ago, and what they put in place, particularly the construction of the Solano water project and the multi-decadal use of conjunctive water management. So the sub-basin overall is in balance and in a sustainable condition. And we know that there's concerns about the drought, the extreme drought conditions that we've been experiencing in the last couple of years, and indications into the future that, we have a lot of things to have on our radar. For the future projection of 50 years, we did use the DWR data served up for climate change. And there's recognition that that's not perfect. They're downscale global climate models. There's information that spans wetter and drier years. We look at both kinds of results coming out of the simulations 50 years in the future. And those are something that would be looked at during the 5 years from when this GSP is submitted, and the next GSP needs to be updated, and 5 years after that. So there's always going to be kind of a moving target looking at what constitutes the best available data that can be used to inform management approaches. So the Solano Sub-Basin achieves or maintains groundwater sustainability through the avoidance of what are referred to as undesirable results in 6 sustainability indicators, and those are listed on this slide. Through the analyses during GSP development, we determined the overall health or status of the groundwater in the sub-basin by monitoring groundwater related parameters for these sustainability indicators, particularly groundwater levels, groundwater storage, groundwater quality, the interconnectivity between surface water and groundwater, land subsidence, and then overall looking at tracking the status of the conditions. One of the things that we've mentioned in previous meetings is that there's no coastal freshwater seawater interface. So seawater intrusion is not pertinent in the Solano sub-basin, but we are looking at groundwater quality, and we are looking at shallow groundwater quality near the delta interface as an indicator of whether or not there are changes in surface water outflows that may also affect shallow groundwater. The 5 sustainability indicators relevant to the Solano sub-basin are generally in good condition on the sub-basin scale. However, we do recognize that there are local areas like the northwestern area of the sub-basin that need attention. There are also areas where pre-existing groundwater quality conditions, which are not the role of the GSAs to correct. However, future groundwater management actions can't contribute to groundwater quality degradation. So to avoid any undesirable results, there's future monitoring that would occur throughout the subbasin that would continue to inform the understanding of groundwater conditions and also inform future management actions. The GSP describes many types of monitoring networks for purposes of quantitatively tracking the sustainable management criteria for the 5 sustainability indicators that I just mentioned. And this slide shows an example of just one of these networks. This is the groundwater level monitoring network, and it includes 2 types of monitoring sites. There's a larger network of wells to monitor groundwater levels, and these are referred to as supplemental monitoring sites. There are 137 of those sites across the subbasin, but there's also a subset of that network that's referred to as representative monitoring sites. Those are the ones to which we attach the quantitative criteria and we even more closely track. And there's 31 of those types of monitoring sites that are used to assess the criteria and relate to those to groundwater levels in order to ensure ongoing sustainability. And on this slide, there's also a couple of areas that we've highlighted in the central to the southerly portions of the subbasin. These are identified as data gap areas. It's recognized in the GSP regulations that there are data gaps and there are ongoing ways of addressing and filling those data gaps. So in this case, we'll be looking for additional wells in these areas to incorporate in the monitoring network to have a greater density of the monitoring in these areas in the future. Another important part of the groundwater sustainability plan is identifying projects and management actions, and these help to maintain or achieve groundwater sustainability as we go forward. The collaborative and the other GSAs and also the Community Advisory Committee discuss potential projects and management actions that can be applied in response to changing conditions in the subbasin in order to avoid undesirable results. So we have a large menu of these kinds of projects and management actions that could be implemented as needed and are particularly important as we look ahead to potential future conditions and changes in land or water uses, and also climate change and changing groundwater conditions. In the GSP, we also focused on some of these in order to look at what those projects and management actions in particular might be used in the near term, not always in response to an already occurring condition that we're concerned about, but also to get ahead of any condition and to mitigate for those conditions. When we intentionally pump groundwater for use, we also want to understand how the groundwater system can be replenished. And this map shows areas that have soils and land surface conditions with physical characteristics that lend themselves to recharging the groundwater system. As we've mentioned in previous meetings, the green areas show where there's a better opportunity for recharge to occur, while the warmer colors, the reds, the oranges, yellows, show poorer potential for recharge to occur. And we also want to know how can we leverage the use of pre-existing conveyance structures so we can readily capture and move surplus stormwater onto lands suitable for recharge. As you may recognize, even though December was a wetter month than potentially expected in California, one of the downsides of having all of that precipitation focused in a singular month is not everywhere in California is prepared to capture and move surplus stormwater onto the lands that are suitable for recharge. So that's something that we want to pay attention to. How are we prepared to capture that water when it's available? As has been discussed during previous Community Advisory Committee meetings, there is this area in the northwestern portion of the subbasin that's showing a localized decrease in groundwater levels over the past 3 decades. It's not a large decrease, but it is one that we want to stay ahead of. So in this area, it generally has excellent recharge potential. And it's an area where we're wanting to look at where storm flows and flood flows, when they're available and when they can be used, that we would try to use them for recharge potentially. But we'd also be looking at whether or not there are other ways to manage surface water and groundwater and what makes the most sense physically and also economically. One example that we're showing here is flood flows from creeks in the area, not including Puda Creek, that may have surplus flows during wet years and how those might be captured and retained on agricultural lands. So on this slide, it shows examples of potential projects that could be used to augment and replenish the groundwater system, including what I just mentioned about capturing and using surplus stormwater or floodwater, and focusing on the areas that have the right physical characteristics to make a difference. We'd also want to consider landowner concerns. There's been some discussions preliminarily over the last year or two about specific landowners' concerns, and there are going to be efforts here in the very near term, in the next month or two, where we're doing additional outreach to the property owners and or the lessees that are working these lands to hear from the landowners and the growers. You know, what other issues are there to be concerned about? What other ideas are there about how to go about this? And we want to hear from them. So it's already been said, but it can't be said enough. We thank you for all your invaluable input and engagement during the GSP development process. It's been a lot of effort in a few years. It's not very much time compared to the 100 years that it took to get the act in place. And the final GSP has now been adopted by all 10 GSAs representing the Solano Sub-Basin. So that is a remarkable feat at this point in time. We're working on next steps to upload the entire document, including references and information related to the monitoring networks, to the DWR portal. That all has to be done by January 31st. But as we look ahead, this submittal process, this is just the first major milestone. This is a living, constantly dynamic document. To be understood in that light, it certainly doesn't sit on a shelf. It'll be used to monitor and track groundwater conditions, identify and address data gaps, and to implement projects and management actions as needed. And we've already begun working on the annual report for the Sub-Basin. Ironically, this report is due April 1st, yes, in this year, so just a couple months after the GSP is required to be submitted. And this annual report provides information on groundwater levels and trends, changes in storage, and other information about the Sub-Basin, and particularly groundwater use, not only by those who are well recognized for typical beneficial uses, but also the groundwater dependent ecosystems and environmental uses. At least every 5 years, the GSP report, the larger, more comprehensive report, must be updated. And then these reports, both the 5-year and the annual report, those essentially continue indefinitely. There would be no plan within the state to stop that. And it's really up to the locals to manage, how the Sub-Basin maintains sustainability going forward. So thank you again, especially to all of those on the Community Advisory Committee for your ongoing participation and engagement throughout this GSP development process. And we certainly look forward to your continued participation, as the GSP has begun to be implemented. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks, Vicki. And thanks to the entire project team who has done all of this work, and again, to all of your input to date. I wanted to just take a minute before we turn to looking at GSP implementations to see if there's any questions. I have noted a few people have typed in items in the chat, so thank you for doing that. Ben, did you want to say any more about your project idea at this point?
No, it's just a suggestion. I've pitched it a couple times, but if you keep throwing it out there, maybe somebody will grab onto it.
Yeah, well, I mean, as we talked about before, I think this is a really exciting time where, you know, so much of today has been to prepare the groundwater plans and to make sure the modeling was solid and things like that. And so now, as Vicki described and showed in that timeline, you know, we're looking forward not just to the annual reporting, but to projects and management actions. And so I see, thanks, Ben, for your idea. Roberta has typed in some things. I'm gonna help us keep going in terms of time, just to look at implementation, but keep typing into the chat and we'll come back to some of these questions and maybe a little bit more discussion. But Chris, why don't I go ahead and share a slide on funding right now and invite you to talk about funding and some of the work going forward. So yeah, give me a moment to share my screen. Great.
Yeah, thanks, Jen, while you're doing that. And I want to echo all the other sentiments. We really do appreciate the Citizens Advisory Committee and the time you've spent in helping us shape this plan, you know, for several years now. So we really do appreciate all the valuable input that you've provided to us. And as you've seen, it has helped us shape. And as we're getting these questions, like John on the phone, some of the areas that we may need to look at a little bit closer, we're going to continue to do that. So we keep on giving us input. We really appreciate that. And so just kind of to touch off the discussion, I know many of you have already heard this, and this is not new information, but there may be a few on the call where they haven't been as fortunate to be involved as the rest of you. I just want to kind of touch base just briefly and talk about, you know, how we've gotten to where we are with funding for development of the GSP. And we've been very fortunate along the way. We received 2 grants from the state through Proposition 1 and through Proposition 68 to help develop the GSP. We've had a lot of local match from the agencies themselves, their staff time, actual cash provided to help with grant applications and with some of the things we've needed to do along the way. DWR has also helped with facilitation support services. Some of the time for the Ag Innovations team has been through a master contract through the state. And we've also had a technical support services, which again, great support from some of our local landowners. Herb Wimmer and some others have been very gracious in allowing us to put some additional wells on their property so that we could collect information. And as Vicki pointed out, there's some other areas we still need to look at. And, you know, unfortunately through the whole COVID pandemic, we've kind of lost sight of some of that interaction and coordination we would like to have done, but hopefully things can calm down a little bit. You know, moving forward, and we can start talking to a few other landowners and see if we can, you know, use our equipment on some of the wells to collect more information to, you know, get us a better feel in some of those areas of the sub-basin where we need a little more data. Now moving forward for implementation of the GSP, we're certainly going to look for more grants where possible, but most likely the bulk of the costs are going to be paid through local fees on stakeholders. And, you know, we completely understand growers and ranchers and homeowners are, you know, constantly bombarded by fees and assessments and CSDs. And, you know, we get that gets a bit much at times, and none of us like this, but it really is necessary to maintain our local control on maintaining and sustaining our groundwater resources. So in the next few months, we're going to be starting a series of meetings to sit down with stakeholders and talk about fees. And just like this GSP process, we want to hear your comments and concerns and try to address them as best as we can and shape these fees that makes the most sense for stakeholders and the sub-basin moving forward. Right now, we have ERA Economics working on a financial plan for the GSP, which will really inform the rate study. So we need to figure out the true costs of implementing this GSP on an annual basis. And once we have those numbers and we develop that rate study, that's when we're going to sit down with stakeholders and invite them to start talking about the whole process. You know, what are your issues? What are your concerns? What would you like to see? We're hoping to keep things as simple as possible, try to do an overall charge for GSP compliance, and then some type of additional overlay fee for those that are actually using groundwater, and try to keep it as simple as that. And we're hoping to stay away from looking at actual groundwater extraction and requiring everyone that has a well to put a meter on their wells. Again, because we're in fairly good and stable conditions, and we actually have extra groundwater that's being stored on an annual basis. We think we can keep things simple like that, at least for the next 5 years. And as we go through these rate studies and a Prop 218 process, we'll be looking at this every 5 years. So as mentioned earlier, as conditions change, if things change here in the Sub-Basin, we can address those, and we may need to relook at the fee structure or some other funding structures as we move forward. So just wanted to kind of give that upfront discussion. And Jen, I guess maybe at this point we can open it up for general discussion.
Great. Yeah. Why don't we do that? I'm not seeing any questions typed in the chat, but I do want to encourage people to type any questions in the chat. And starting with Community Advisory Committee members, also if you would like to come off mute and share any questions on what Chris just shared. And if not, I have a couple questions. Yeah, but anybody want to ask about implementation, looking forward and funding that implementation? Sorry, Stephen, were you going to say something?
Can you hear me okay?
You're a little light. If you want to up your volume a little bit.
Is that better?
That's much better. Thanks.
All right. So one of the things we want to talk about in this meeting is outreach. It sounds like, though, the outreach from here on out is a little more targeted. What Chris Lee was just talking about with fees that would go to individuals or communities that would be paying those fees, and then even individual landowners about monitoring wells and that sort of thing. Is there any other broad, or what's the sort of next step and all for broader outreach?
Yeah, great question. And so I think right now, Chris was kind of speaking on outreach, and I think there's a question on the table right now. I think we'd love to hear the Community Advisory Committee's advice on outreach timing and format related to fees and funding. But Stephen, to your question, our whole next section, we want to talk about broader outreach, both outreach to groups that might not even be aware of the groundwater sustainability plan, and then also outreach to groups that can be involved with projects and management actions, et cetera. So I'm going to ask you to hold that thought for just a couple more minutes while we have Chris's question on the table, which is really a question to the Community Advisory Committee, or any observers. I invite you to jump in with any questions on outreach timing and format, given that fees are going to be necessary, but we want it to be a transparent process and want to get input to help inform it.
And thanks, Jen. Maybe one thing I will offer up, and I did talk about this a little bit. One of the things when we have been reaching out to not only the CAC, but other groups like the Irrigated Lands Program, the growers and ranchers, one of the things we did here is they really wanted to see some numbers before we started sitting down and talking about how those fees would be assessed. So that really is the big part that we're putting together right now, is this financial plan and then doing the rate study. And then also another question that came in from Elizabeth Patterson is who will be charged these fees? And essentially everyone within the Sub-Basin. Again, nothing's in stone right now. We're still trying to figure that out, but we're most likely there's going to be, for everyone that resides within the Sub-Basin, is going to be paying some type of GSP compliance fee. So that would be the whole eastern half of Solano County, which overlays the Sub-Basin. And then it also goes into Sacramento County a little bit. Now they'll have to do their own separate 218 process there as well, but we're hoping that the information we collect here through our rate study and the conversations we have with our stakeholders can carry over to those parts in Sacramento County as well. So those are the people that would actually be charged the fees.
Hi, Chris, this is Sarah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I have a clarification question. So when you're saying implementation costs will be covered by fees, do you mean implementation costs of specific projects, or is this more general of maintaining the GSA and doing annual reports and monitoring and all that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Sarah, and it's the latter. Yeah, so we're going to bifurcate projects and management actions to looking at zones of benefit. So when I'm talking about the implementation fees, exactly to what you're talking about, our annual reports, additional outreach and education. To Stephen's point, what other parts of the communities, what other additional things are we going to talk to this group and other groups about, our monitoring, things like that. But yeah, when we get to actual projects and management actions, we'll be looking at a separate funding stream for that, and we'll hope again to avail of grants and other programs where we can. But if we have a project or management action, let's just say that happens to be needed in the Northwest focus area, we're going to be looking to that group, that community, to help support those projects and management actions, and not ask the entire sub-basin to fund those types of projects and management actions.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And thanks to those of you. There's a good dialogue going on in the chat, which I appreciate. Folks are doing a bunch of question answers there. So anything else that has either ideas you have related to outreach, related to fees, again, to fund the not the specific projects, but as Chris just described, the work of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency Administration. Anybody want to add any other questions or ideas?
Hi, this is Elizabeth Patterson.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hi, I'll start my video. I just wanted to follow up on the funding issue, because I think that I'm a big proponent for integrated water management, and there are factors that enter in, not just for affecting the benefits of groundwater sustainability planning, but also the flood management, and there's some, of course, habitat issues involved. And so maybe it would be really popular to do an integrated water management 218 process, which actually might spread the cost around a little bit better, but also add energy and a funding mechanism for IRWA programs. And we're part of 2 integrated water management planning areas, and this would be huge, and probably could get support from the roundtable folks who are always looking for more sustained funding. So just wanted to put that out there, and maybe have an actual dialogue about that whole concept of funding IRWA.
Yeah, thanks for that. IRWA, for folks who don't know, is Integrated Regional Water Management Efforts. And Elizabeth, thanks for that idea. And also, I think we want to keep the ideas coming for grants and other things to fund this. Chris, do you want to add anything to that, or?
Absolutely, yeah, it's a great point, Elizabeth. And what I was just about to type in the chat is that the Westside IRWM has a meeting this Wednesday, so I'll bring that up to the group on Wednesday. And I'm kind of peripherally participating in that group now. I've delegated to staff to take my position with the Westside IRWM because they can spend more time with it. But it's an excellent idea, Elizabeth, to look at how we can synergize other existing projects and programs out there that are being done locally, regionally, and statewide that look at multi-benefit wins. And Elizabeth hit on it perfectly. There's ways where we can integrate, flood more, rain more, that also integrate habitat restoration and deal with our groundwater dependent ecosystems, and also provide flexibility for our growers and ranchers. So there's absolutely ways that we can look at that, and it's a very good point. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks. I'm seeing a lot of questions, and as long as there's one more in the chat, Sarah asked, do member agencies of the collaborative have to pay dues? She says she knows that that's how YOLO Sub-Basin is partially funding their efforts.
Yes, we did that initially. So when the GSAs were developing and we were looking at putting together grant applications that we were successful on, as I mentioned earlier, for Proposition 1 and Proposition 68, the individual GSAs did contribute locally to help with those grant applications, and have helped with a few other of the studies and reports we've had to do along the way. Now that we're moving into the implementation aspect of the GSP, we are going to need to look at how we fund the implementation actions needed to sustainably manage our groundwater resources. And this is where, it ties into compliance with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and the GSP guidelines. The GSAs do have the power to pass on and try to get those costs locally, again, in large part to make sure we are managing things at a local level, and to make sure that the state doesn't come in and ask us to do more, and frankly charge us a lot more than what we're potentially contemplating here.
Great. Thanks for that. And I'm going to invite people to keep asking questions in the chat. We can come back to some of them, but as Steve McCord previewed a minute ago, as Stephen McCord asked, we also want to talk about broader outreach, not just related to fees. And so I'm going to share my screen and move us a little bit more broadly. And many of you have met Guadalupe Garcia. She has been active on this project for over a year, and she's going to help summarize some of the community outreach engagement activities to date. But to Stephen's question, we want this group's opinion on outreach on all fronts. And so Lupe, I'll turn it over to you to give us a quick overview and then engage the group and get everybody's opinion.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Stephen, for the segue onto engagement. That was perfect. So a lot of efforts have gone into community engagement throughout the GSP development process. And I just want to highlight a few things that we were able to accomplish. So we were able to put live a solanogsp.com website. Currently, the draft for adoption is up there. Once the executive summary, both in Spanish and English, has been approved, then that will go up there as well. We've also conducted 3 town hall meetings and also 3 in-person open houses. And although there were challenges with outreach as far as in-person meetings go, we saw a great increase in participation from 70 participants when we were in person to about tripling to 243 participants during our virtual town halls. And again, that was in the last 3 years. We also had a drinking water forum that in total that covered about 327 participants that participated in our public engagement meetings. We definitely want to increase those numbers and diversify our audience. And that's why we're here to just kind of pick your brains and see what it is, any advice or any suggestions you might have in order to further engage the Solano Basin community. Another big effort that we put out there is working with local RCDs to do school programs on groundwater sustainability and kind of really getting the youth engaged in order for them to have an early start in thinking about what groundwater sustainability means to them, and in hopes that they go back home and help educate their parents as well to what the importance is behind all of this. There was also outreach at farmers markets. We did newsletters, and of course, launching the Community Advisory Committee and having you all here to provide that essential input that you have. And if we can move on to the next slide. Great. And so I want to open up a moment for discussion to really kind of get to know any further ideas that you might have. We had some great success in involving community members from the Solano Sub-Basin, but this year in particular, there's a great interest in kind of opening up and diversifying that audience and making sure that all the different perspectives in the community are heard, including communities of color and disadvantaged communities. And you all as leaders, as CAC members, are representatives of the Solano Sub-Basin community, and as insiders probably have a lot more know-how and experience within these communities and can help broaden our perspectives and really think about what's missing. How can we come into this community and maybe engage more with existing groups, existing places, existing events that might be going on, where we can further engage the community and make sure that they know about the groundwater sustainability plan, and also how it's going to affect them and how they should just be involved in this process, or that it's available, that they can be involved in this process. So I'd like to open up a time for discussion with the following questions in mind. So feel free to unmute. Feel free to start giving some input and really think about these 3 following questions that are highlighted here. And those are, who are community groups or leaders to coordinate with? Do you have any other outreach strategies that you would like to share specifically for your community? And how can we meet people where they are and work in existing spaces? Yeah, so.
And Lupe, while you're thinking, I just want to thank Roberta, who mentioned that she forwarded information onto the Rural Vacaville Preservation Alliance. And thanks, Elizabeth, for your idea about radio. These are, I think, exactly the kind of ideas we're looking for. So yeah, feel free to come off mute and share your ideas.
Stephen, I can start.
Yeah, go for it, Stephen.
Okay. So a couple of things that I'm involved with, and Herb Wimmer as well, would be the LPCC. But I'll start off with Poudre Creek Council. So that's a nonprofit that focuses on Poudre Creek, which is the northern border of this the Sub-Basin. And there are 4 things that readily come to mind about how the GSA and all could outreach there. 2 of them would be somewhat broad. So Creek Speak is just a general community service that we provide occasionally, certain seasons. So it's an evening discussion of, say, an hour. So somebody will present and there's time for Q&A. So it could be, something specific about groundwater along Poudre Creek and how it could be changing in the future, how it's managed, et cetera. Another one would be similar group of stakeholders could be a tour of the watershed, especially along the creek and key areas that are, have some surface water, groundwater interaction, so that where it changed, my recollection from the work that Vicky showed earlier was there's a upper reach that's a little more gaining or losing and vice versa downstream. So just touch on those a little bit. Another broad one would be e-news, as most nonprofits do. They send out newsletters, and ours goes out on 4,000 people or something like that. So broad, blurb or press release kind of stuff that you could put out there about other events or the availability of the plan, et cetera. And then the 4th one I was remembering with the image about the game that students were playing. Poudre Creek Council, as well as others, perhaps do things like the Waterways program, which goes into 4th, 5th grade schools, classrooms rather, and teaches about where the water comes from. So this could be a useful component of it. Maybe you could buy another one of those, the games or something like that for them to distribute to the teachers and all that they work with. So that's it with Poudre Creek Council. Another thing notice the accord was mentioned was the Lower Poudre Creek Coordinating Committee, and Herb, I know, is one of the members of that. He could say more about it, but that's a forum for the stakeholders along Poudre Creek, and so that's just good. They could have some regular discussion about groundwater management, groundwater surface water interactions along the creek.
Yeah,
I'd like to speak to that, if it's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yes, I think LPCC would be a good venue. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a large public circle because of the nature of the organization. But one of the things that has happened over the last 20 years of the Lower Poudre Creek Council is the streamkeeper, Rich Marovich, now recently retired, has identified several hundred landowners that run the entire run of the creek, which is the northern edge of the GSP. And many of those people farm large tracts of land, and some actually farm tracts of land away from the creek, in addition to their creekland properties. So Max Stevenson, the new streamkeeper, may very well be a source of contact information for people who are obviously very interested in water and right along the northern boundary, which might, actually probably shadows the area of greatest concern anyway. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Herb. That's great. Anyone else would like to share?
This is Elizabeth again. Maybe we could take a page from Water Education Foundation and do tours. I think a lot of people don't even know, they just go up and down 80 and they don't really understand what's in their own county. And I did a photo contest in East Contra Costa years ago that actually led to a photographer becoming really wildly popular and famous. And that was we were highlighting the East Contra Costa farmlands. So there's a couple of ideas that would engage more people.
Yeah, I love that. I love the artistic aspect in that one. Anyone else would like to share an idea?
One other thought that came up for me, and I don't know whether this would work, so maybe this is just a little too crazy.
Anything is great. I love it, Herb. Just throw it out there.
Many years ago, I was on the advisory committee for the Lawrence Hall of Science for 15 years for math and science in the 7 Western states. And what I liked about working at the Lawrence Hall of Science, which is above UC Berkeley, perhaps you're familiar with it, was the outreach to all the school districts. And the school districts go into almost every house in America. And the program that I was involved in had to do with creating science and math education materials, which ultimately ended up, for example, as homework, which went to every house. And so I don't know, maybe that's a stretch, but if there could be a connection to the local school district by providing educational materials that would be useful as homework assignments in the home for middle school age kids, at least. Our program ran from 6th grade up. So you might find that you got a venue there because teachers are looking for materials that are science-based, positive, forward-looking, that sort of thing. Might be something to try.
Herb, this is Elizabeth. You would not believe this, but I was one of the first teachers at the Lawrence Hall of Science for going into teaching hands-on science in the Lafayette and Berkeley school districts.
All right.
Yeah, and this is just it. I mean, like so much with the RCD here in Solano County is that reaching out and these different venues to get people to even understand about soil, let alone water, and how water percolates through soil. It would be terrific.
Yeah, definitely. I've always been a long time believer that our public school systems is just like a great place to outreach. And if we can teach our children at a young age the importance of these topics like groundwater, it really just projects that lifelong care of water throughout, their lives and just growing up. So I think that's such a wonderful idea. Do we have anyone else that would like to share any ideas or new perspectives we haven't thought about?
Lupe, this is Chris. I did put in the chat, the Water Agency actually does participate in a lot of local water education programs with both the Solano RCD and the Poudre Creek Council. So we're always open to additional curricula that you guys would like to have us add to those programs. We're tracking to hit 100% of the 4th and 5th graders in Solano County this year. And then we also have programs at the senior level, at the 11th grade, and then also the younger kids. And you're all absolutely right. Hitting the kids and educating them about their water sources, where they come from, has been a very fortunate aspect of my interaction with our board of directors. And they have been very supportive of education programs. We actually have 2 former educators that are on our board of directors. So any additional input you have or any additional curricula you could think of that we'd like to add to water education, yes, please forward that to me. That'd be great.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is great. See what we can generate when we really talk about this stuff and think about new pathways.
Oh, that's great. And hey, one other question. I can see Mike has got his hand up too. I wonder if there's any gatherings that are like local to certain groups, like, maybe a tribal gathering, or in some places like there's a special Filipino food festival, or there's different things like that that might be happening. Those are really wonderful ways to find communities where they're at, and we do a lot of tabling in places like that. And so if there's anything that you've seen that has life in the area, that would be great to hear about too. Mike, did you want to go? I jumped the queue there.
So good. I just put to add on to the points that were made, I just added it to the chat.
Oh, great. Yeah,
but,
I'm capturing all that.
But I think in addition to targeting the I guess K-12 system, one thing that we were talking about at Solano College is hosting different open house events, more focused on STEM or STEAM education. There's different professors that have a focus on environmental science, biology. A lot of times they're looking for different opportunities to get their students out. And maybe there's a possibility to, like when the talks about tours and whatnot, that's something us as faculty have been talking about to see how we can get different opportunities to take students outside their area of emphasis and allow them to get exposed to different things that are still in the umbrella term of science. So while building community amongst themselves, and then also having them allowing them to develop a deeper appreciation of what kind of goes around them. And that, to me, like, because ideally so a lot of times you'll see, those students you'll see a couple kind of shift, their emphasis, and but overall it's just, ideally it's supposed to be more impacting. And then based on whatever feedback, you guys are seeking, that's an opportunity there as well. So the only problem is COVID and all the different
Yes, I found that there's been quite a bit of challenge. I've been trying to tap into the community college network, but it's always, it's been a challenge lately. And I think particularly because of COVID. So if you have any professors' names in mind or any groups in mind that, you want to connect us and link us up in that way, we're definitely welcome. You'll find my email at the end of this presentation. And yeah, feel free to give me a holler with any names that you might think would be interested.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, let's take Roberta.
Roberta, hi. I was just going to mention that when I got my master's at Truro, we worked on several different projects, and one of them I worked on actually with a group was having different medication dumped in the water system by throwing it down your toilet. So I was just thinking, Truro, they do a lot of public health program training, and you might be able to get some programming through them.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so because there's an environmental component to public health that is a requirement. And so during the environmental studies part of the program, that's when it would be a great time to get maybe students interested in this.
Yeah, that'd be great to look into. Roberta, could you spell that out, the program?
Yeah, it's Truro University. It's now on Mare Island. It's TOURO.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to capture that for our notes. Let's see. And I think if you have any further inputs, feel free to keep continuing them onto the chat. But I'd like to pass it on to Jen for continue to speak about more CAC involvement.
Great. Yeah. And I just, thanks Lupe for leading that discussion, also for the work. And I think people heard this, but just to re-mention it, both the executive summary and it's a 30-page executive summary of the groundwater sustainability plan. So it's still, there's a lot in there, and an abstract, which is shorter, have been translated into Spanish. And, as Lupe mentioned, it's not just about, how do we post something, generically? It's about how do we meet people where they are, and translation is an important part of that. I want to thank Vicki and Lupe and the team for their work on the translation, and also thank you guys for the ideas. Thanks both for the ones people mentioned, but in the chat, I read more about Solano County Farmers Market, Pleasant Valley Fire Safe Council, local scout groups, Solano College, Vacaville campus, farm service agencies. Keep those ideas coming. And in fact, as Genevieve and others pointed out, we want to help this be something owned by the community, in spaces with the community. And so this is actually a very great transition to the next slide, which is about all of you. Just in this conversation, you guys are showing your knowledge in the community. And as Lupe described, your leadership in the community. And we sent all of you a certificate signed by Chris Lee. We wish we could do this live. As Mike said, so much of this can happen live, but it's also impressive to see this community. I appreciate all of you showing your faces, and in a minute, I'm gonna take off the screen, and it would be fun to see everybody. But I want to really, the entire team wants to, as Vicky said, we'll keep saying it, because you guys you've provided incredible input, and as described in just the conversation that we just had, we want to continue to receive your input. So I'm going to turn now to the last part of the meeting, which is really to make sure that we know how to keep you involved, and to hear how you want to stay involved. And again, I just want to take a moment to honor this moment in time. Thank you for your input in the meetings to date. Thank you for the ideas you just shared. And thank you for staying involved. I'm going to turn to a couple more slides that talk about that. So this first one is really about learning from you. 4 of you have already, we've sent it out a couple times, a short survey that asks you about, how we can improve. What have you learned? Thanks to, I think 4 or 5 of you have already completed it. Lupe, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat the link that's here on the screen. It's on SurveyMonkey. And I'm actually going to invite people. Normally, I don't encourage people to multitask, but if people don't mind clicking on that right now, and actually just, we want you, while the ideas are fresh, to really, that you share those. It leaves some space for anything you haven't shared in the chat thus far. But we bring that up in the spirit of learning, because we want to hear what's been useful to you, and what we can continue going forward. And since I know a number of you are not Community Advisory Committee members, and the survey is really focused for the Community Advisory Committee, but I want to invite everybody else on the call to, and any of you who have already completed the survey, to go ahead and answer a question that I just typed into the chat. Tell us if you don't have to put it in the survey. Tell us what you've taken away from your time as a CAC member, as a Community Advisory Committee member, or if you're an observer on this call, maybe it's your first time listening to this. I know we have had 30 people on this call. What's something you've learned or taken away, either today or through your process of involvement with the groundwater sustainability plan? I'll give folks to either type in the survey or to type in the chat. And I'm noticing one thing already, which I don't want to minimize, that currently the groundwater usage in the Sub-Basin is sustainable broadly. And when this group first started meeting, that was still a question. So I think it's good to be going through that exploration, as we've talked about in this call, through the process of annual reports and a 5-year update. We're going to keep asking that question. We're going to keep updating. Great. I'll be in silence for a minute while I invite others to type into the chat or to fill out the survey. Thanks, folks, for doing that. And please feel free to continue to keep in the survey. I want to just mention a few other things for kind of people's continuing thought. As mentioned earlier, we hope you will stay involved and really spread the word. And I think that outreach discussion was a great preview of that. You guys have given us ideas. We can certainly get in touch with those groups, but we'll go a lot further if we can work with you to be in touch with those groups, or if you have somebody that you want to do an introduction, or if you're going to, as Genevieve said, a Filipino food festival, if you can help to make an entree or tell us when those are, or we can work with you to get you information to get there. We really hope you'll stay involved. You see on this slide here, Lupe's contact information. She can help it to get it to the right person on the team. We also want to invite you to not only, if you're not receiving the newsletter, to receive it or share it with any of the folks that you've just mentioned, the farm bureaus, the teachers, the professors, the groups working on groundwater, or maybe not working on groundwater, but who we know it's relevant for. So wanted to, while I leave this slide up there, I wanted to take a moment to invite people to share in the chat anything else that you'd like us to know related to either the conversation that we've had today or your involvement with the CAC, your ideas about how to stay involved. Want to invite that into the chat. So great. And I know a lot of people, I can see the Survey Monkey. I appreciate that a bunch of people are in the survey right now. So thank you, Community Advisory Committee members, for giving us your feedback there. I do see a question who Lou asks if today's meeting is being recorded, and yes, it is. And Lupe earlier shared the archive link where the CAC meetings are. I'll invite her to put it there again. Obviously, it'll take us a couple days to get it up, but yes, we are sharing this, and we invite you to share it with others so that we can continue the conversation going. Thanks for asking, Lou. And now I want to turn to any dedicated, thank you, observers to the call. You've been giving generous space to the Community Advisory Committee members, but I want to invite folks. I'm going to take off my screen and I want to invite folks to, look, you can see the 27 other folks on the call, and I want to invite any observers or anybody on the Community Advisory Committee, the project team or GSA representatives. Want to invite you to have an open dialogue about anything else you'd like us to know, or anything you want to know in a future meeting, or anything that you would like to see in the newsletter, or any other suggestions, anything top of mind. We really learn from your feedback and want to take the advantage of the 6 meetings you've had, and also to know how to work with you going forward. Feel free to raise your hand or just take yourself off mute.
I have perhaps a density problem. I'm a little dense. It sounds like this is the end of the Community Advisory Committee, but you're talking about creating a fee structure, which may be the most hotbed issue yet to come. So quite frankly, I'm a little dismayed to see that that's what seems to be taking place.
Thanks, Herb. Appreciate what you're bringing up, that when we set up the Community Advisory Committee, we had funding and had a plan for having meetings in 2020 and 2021. We did this one in 2022. We actually hoped it could have been a live meeting, but here we are. Herb, do you have a suggestion for what you'd like to see going forward?
Well, I certainly think that we spent a lot of time here a few minutes ago talking about all the ways you could outreach, and presumably that was for general outreach, but also to figure out how you're going to pay for this. And so I don't know, but I think the GSP should form another, I'll call it an advisory committee or something. At least a loose-knit group of people who have an interest in how the funding design is going to evolve and get community output there. So maybe that's in there, and I just don't understand it. That's why I'm claiming density.
So
yeah.
if I can comment, one of the problems with 218 is that you can't have a governmental advocacy for it. It can only be facts. And so it almost needs to be, the advocacy needs to be generated by the citizens. they can use the facts and the information from various governmental agencies, but any funding that has been received by the GSA, I'm pretty sure would be restricted because of that reason. So, however, I agree in concept with what you're saying, is that there should be some kind of citizen-driven effort for the fees, which is why the IRWINT program to me is really a great way to approach it. Yeah, I never even thought of it until you just raised it, is that that's the reason I'm sure that there's a limitation about what the advisory committee can do.
Yeah, and that's it. Thank you, Elizabeth. And I didn't go into that level of detail when I was talking about the fee aspect, and I absolutely understand your concern, Herb, and what Elizabeth said is exactly why we have to be very careful in how we move forward on the fee structure and involvement with the CAC. The short answer is it's going to be open to everyone. We're going to invite all stakeholders to provide comments and speak about, you know, what they think of different ways that we can address these fees. And we just have to be careful in focusing a singular group as we move forward, because it eventually will have to go to a Prop 218 process and a vote, a public vote. So we have to be kind of careful in the structuring of the whole part of it.
So I didn't understand, Chris, public vote.
Well, if we get to a point where we actually have to do a Proposition 218 process, there will actually be a vote for the fee structure moving forward for those that are in the Solano County portion, the eastern portion of the Sub-Basin, and then there'll be a separate vote in the Sacramento County portion. And essentially, it's a major protest, or you move forward with the Prop 218 process to move forward with the fee. So it's there's a lot of moving parts. The first part is getting what the actual rate study says as far as the actual costs. Then we sit down with all you good folks and everyone else that wants to participate in discussing what the fees may look like moving forward. And we hopefully come to some type of agreement on some alternatives that work for the community as a whole, and as also for paying for the implementation aspects of the plan. And then we actually put it to a vote to the community within the Sub-Basin. And if we get the majority say yes, then we move forward. We pass that information on to Solano County tax assessors. And then it come January of next year, if we're successful in what we're trying to do, then we move forward with those fees.
So Chris, I don't think in this case that it's a majority vote. I think it has to be more than 50% protest.
That's right.
That's right. There isn't a ballot sent out. It's
not for that. Yeah, not for 218. Yeah, there's so many different ways to go about this.
Right.
Yeah, 218 is probably going to be the best way. I mean, and on all honesty, we could do a Prop 26 or 218, but 218 probably makes the most sense. But, you know, as we get closer to setting up these meetings, we'll definitely sit down with everyone and walk through this entire process so that everyone has all the information in front of them before we move forward on any fees, just so that you know exactly what all the different things we need to go through and get all the information from you good folks before we move forward on anything.
I didn't want to hijack your advisory committee meeting at this point. It's just that it seemed to me that there needs to be more process there, and we can wait to get the answer to that, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Herb. It's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah. That's what these meetings are for, and I think that's why we wanted to ask this group's input on the fee process. And Herb, to your bigger picture point, you know, I think we really want the folks who, all of you guys have been learning so much about the GSP and know so much. We want to keep you engaged. So the survey is a great place to put, you know, ways that you would like to stay engaged, whether, you know, it's specific information or groups, you know, helping an RCD do outreach in a school, or, you know, just getting the annual updates. So that's why we want to put that survey. And if for some reason you think of something else, you've already filled out the survey and you think of something else, feel free to fill it out again and just let us know that it's your second time you wanted to add something. I'm looking at the chat to see if there's any additional discussion there, and also wanting to take time if anybody else has questions. I'm seeing one question in here from Roberta about our grants part of the funding in the future. Chris, do you want to just answer that live?
We hope so. Yes, there's actually solicitation coming out very soon for the critically overdrafted sub-basins. So that's the first kind of sweep. You know, again, we're very fortunate. We're a medium priority sub-basin. So we have to wait until that solicitation package comes out from DWR when those sub-basins are available to avail, you know, send in applications for that funding. But that's, you know, that's going to be our first step, is to look to see what is available for help from the state or other regional programs, as Elizabeth mentioned earlier with the IRWIMP. There's other funding sources. And then where we cannot collect funding from grants or other sources, that's where we potentially will have to impose fees.
Yeah, and Lou, I see you had a question.
Yes, I came in late because I had a meeting with the mayor. Is there anybody on here with the Farm Bureau by chance?
I'm not seeing anybody on right now.
Okay, thank you.
Great. I want to honor everybody's time, and I know a few people have to move on to other meetings, but want to give a last minute for anybody to raise their hand or type something into the chat. I'm also seeing a few questions in there, which maybe we can answer those as well. Anybody else have a question that they want to ask live?
There's one in the chat that I'd like to actually answer, Jen. So I did kind of talk a little bit about this. So Jeremy is asking, if we're unsuccessful in locally funding our program, what would be the next step? And very likely what would happen is the State Water Resources Control Board would step in and start managing the sub-basin. And from what we understand, and looking at other sub-basins, they would probably be charging 10 times the amount that what we're contemplating here. So we want to maintain local control. And again, we know that fees are not something anyone looks forward to, but it is the best way to maintain local control. And in all honesty, would be a lot cheaper than if the State Water Board had to step in.
Thanks, Chris. And I just want to, again, take a moment to thank all of you. If you haven't seen it, we've entered our email and contact info a number of times, because we really do want to continue to hear your questions and to work with you on the process, and to take a moment to celebrate the adoption of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan and all the good questions and thoughts you guys have put in. The survey, I'm seeing that there's an early question which asks what's been useful to you about these meetings, and people I think have really appreciated keeping updated on groundwater issues, being able to give specific input in your area. And so please use the survey to do that. Thank you all for your time to attend. We're gonna end the recording now and just say that we hope to see you hopefully maybe sometime live this year as well. So thank you, everyone.